You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading. Guess I got bored.
Well, hello and welcome to Literary Treks, our dedicated books and comic show for Star Trek here on TFM. And I am just one of the hosts, Matthew Rushing, and so excited to have with me, as he is every single time these days, the one and only Casey Pettitt. How are you, Casey?
I am good, and it's good to finally be able to talk about Star Wars Rebels on this show. That's what we're talking about today, right?
Yeah, it feels, I have no idea. We'll get there as we wrap up the Star Trek Rebels, The Liberated. It's bringing to close that trilogy. But before we get there, and before we even get to our news, which we have an action-packed news segment for you because we got some really cool announcements. But please interact with us all over social media. We've got @TrekFM on Twitter, @TrekFM on Instagram. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. Of course, you can find the network online at trek.fm. That's our website. And you can support us over on Patreon at patreon.com/TrekFM, like Casey Pettitt and Greg Rosier do, are associate producers of Literary Treks, and we really appreciate their support. They make sure that, of course, all of the content that's coming to you from Literary Treks, as well as the rest of the network, keeps happening. So we really appreciate that and hope that you'll join just like they did. Go over to patreon.com/TrekFM and see how you can be part of our team. And you can support Literary Treks in this way. Subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. That way you'll get the episodes as soon as they drop. And head us up with a star rating review, say on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you like the show, let other people know that you do by doing that. Also, digital word of mouth, and word of mouth is huge as well. So, spread the show on social media, or, if you've got a friend who likes Star Trek books, let them know they should be listening to Literary Treks. Well, Casey, very exciting that we are getting an old book made new in audio format this August.
Yeah, back in the day, we didn't get a lot of audiobooks, or if we did, they were abridged. And most of the time, they were not read by the author themselves. And most of those times, the author was not the actor himself. And those of you steeped in the literary lore of Star Trek probably know we're talking about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, A Stitch in Time by Andrew Robinson, and it is read by Andrew Robinson, Garrick himself. So that is super exciting and coming on August 1st, 2023. And it's been forever since I've read this book, but I am definitely going to pick up this audiobook and listen to it because it's, with Andy Robinson reading it, I think it's just going to breathe a whole new life into that book.
I mean, I cannot imagine a better way to bring this book to life, and having the voice of Garrick read a book written by him about Garrick. It's just going to be so good. So, no, this is phenomenal. I love that they're doing this. I hope that we'll get more of this, especially since, we aren't getting a ton of new books coming out. This is a great way to go back and do audiobooks of books that never really maybe they got an abridged version back in the day. Will give us the full audiobook treatment. I think that would be phenomenal. And in all honesty, I feel like probably a cheaper way of, trying to get people to read older books by doing that to interest them. And so many people use audiobooks these days, so I think this is phenomenal. The next thing we've got a new book announcement, Casey. It's going to be coming out there in February of 2024. And I don't think I could be more excited than knowing that we're going to be continuing the Star Trek Picard novels. And, I think this is a perfect way to do it. We talked about this idea when we were talking with Dayton and even afterwards. I am so excited about, getting some backstory of the newest captain of the Enterprise, 7 of 9.
Yeah, the book is called Firewall, and it's by our friend David Mack. So, last time he was on the show, he always teases, they all do. They tease us with things they can't talk about, and this was probably one of those. So I can't wait for it. I mean, we've got a placeholder cover, and I wouldn't be upset if it was the actual cover for it. If you look on David's website or kind of anywhere this has been announced, I think that'd be a pretty sweet cover with 7 front and center and all her glory.
Well, and what's neat about this is the way in which it's going to fill in the story of, Voyager returning home and 7 just finding herself out of place. She's rejected from a place in Starfleet and ends up finding that new home with the Fenris Rangers, which will be very exciting to actually get to know more about them as an organization. And seeing that, this could cost her the biggest relationship in her life, the most important relationship, which is her friendship with Admiral Catherine Janeway. And so I love the idea for this book. I think one of the things that we had mentioned is that the Picard series, because it did away with everything we knew in the Litverse that happened in the 24th century, basically, now we have the opportunity to go in and fill all those gaps, and there are many to be filled in, especially in places that they most likely wouldn't touch, even with a Star Trek Legacy series. I think this is the type of book that'll only just enhance your viewing if we don't get a Star Trek Legacy series, we riot, of course. But, this is only something that would enhance that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, getting to see that kind of time span, between the end of Voyager and the beginning of Picard, where we eventually meet her again. There's so much that we can fill in there and find out what she was doing with the Fenris Rangers. And, Admiral Janeway got name dropped so many times, during Star Trek Picard, but we never got to see her. So we know that 7 continued that relationship with her. And we can imagine Janeway probably would not appreciate her going to the Rangers. And I think we might see a little bit of that tension in the relationship. But ultimately, we know from the series that Janeway was the one that sponsored 7's admittance into Starfleet. So something happens there to keep their friendship alive. So really looking forward to seeing how that turns out.
No, I could not agree with you more on that. I'm very excited that this book is going to be coming out, and hopefully that means that we'll be getting more announcement news with other books coming out in 2024. And so crazy to think we're already talking about 2024.
Yeah.
But Casey, one of the things that was interesting is that the most recent episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and we're going to talk a little bit of spoilers there, so if you haven't watched it, you might want to skip to the next chapter here on the podcast. But the Illyrian Enigma comic played a role in the sense of filling in a lot of story elements that they didn't actually get to in the episode. And you had asked a really good question on our outline of whether or not this is actually going to completely make sense now with the context of the show, but would this ever actually, is it going to make it into the context of this show? And that's a question, Chris and I talked about on Saddle Up, when we were talking about this episode, because I think that this comic does give a lot of context to the episode, but it also kind of frustrated me that it just wasn't part of the episode.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like there was some backstory they could have explored during the episode, and even just bringing more in. And yeah, I look forward to hearing that episode of Saddle Up to hear what you guys say. But ultimately, I mean, I feel like there's still some things from the comics that, they don't have to address everything in the show that was in the comics. Like that may not totally make sense, but I feel like there was a connection made with the Vulcans in the comics that was somewhat absent. I mean, maybe there was some tinges of it in the episode, but I'm just really looking forward to seeing where we go from here. I think we all love Strange New Worlds, and, we love the comics. So if they're going to do tie-ins, they're obviously going to be connected somehow. I think Kirsten Beyer was involved in that comic series as well, and she's involved in the shows. So I'm just looking forward to continuing to watch the show and seeing where it goes. But now that we've seen her trial, I feel like there's still some unanswered questions in the show piece of it to really tie the comic in.
Casey, I couldn't agree with you more there. And I, like you, hope that we will actually dive into this more in the show. And it does seem like it's another place which we could add more layers to the Vulcans the same way that Enterprise did. This gives us more layers for that. So I'd be interested to see how that all plays out. And especially since, we teased at the end of the first season with Cybok and something else going on with Vulcans. Maybe this can all tie together. Who knows? Which would be really cool if that's the case. But on to our review of Star Trek number 9. And this continues that series. We have the end of the trial for Benjamin Sisko, and we also have the confrontation between the Red Path and the crew of the Theseus, who have gone to recover the Orb of Creation. How did you feel like this issue went, especially since, we do end on a pretty major cliffhanger?
Yeah, I think we talked in a couple episodes ago probably about a little trepidation I had of another trial of one of our captains. It just seems to be a trope that the comics have gone to throughout the years. But, the way that this one goes, and I've actually been kind of pleased with it and how it's just kind of feathered into the story a little bit. It was, there was a lot going on in this issue. But then to have Sisko essentially found guilty, and then, he's kind of captured a la Captain Picard in Chain of Command, and, hung up, and he's about ready to be executed at the end of this. And one of the things about these comics especially is that, these are old characters. They've already brought Sisko back. We don't know who's safe and who's not in these comics. So to end on this cliffhanger here of, are they going to actually kill Sisko or not, is I don't know. I can't wait to see what they do with the next one. I hope that he gets out of it, but in this day and age, anything can happen.
No, I agree with you. I think that it was a good issue. I also liked the other side where we're talking about how this religious sect, of the Red Path has taken hold in places beyond Kronos, beyond the Klingon people, and attracted people from many different parts of the quadrant here. And I thought that was kind of fascinating. We're basically kind of referencing the idea of people being radicalized into an ideology. And so I thought that was a nice touch, that, this isn't just about Klingons, right? Even though we know the Day of Blood is coming, but this is about that ideology spreading to other people who seem to be of similar mindset, even if they're not Klingon. They could be, Cardassian or Romulan, or, it's very interesting to me. So I think this series has really been fun, and it's really been one that I've been enjoying, because I think the thing I enjoy about it most is that, it's throwing away all the rules, I think, in the best way. And making a universe all on its own. And by doing that, like you said, you don't know who's safe and who's not because of the way in which this comic is being presented and written. So to me, that's what makes it worthwhile, because we're not having to be hold to anything other than what we're doing here in this comic. And of course, they're not disregarding any canon that's happened. I would say they're basically end of Nemesis, then it's them, right? And so they're disregarding, Picard and all that. But basically to create your own rules and then to follow them is great. And so I think they're doing a good job there, which is also very interesting because, we have the motion picture Echoes #2, and this definitely continues the story in a way that I didn't quite see coming.
Yeah, me either. We continue with, our alternate timeline characters, and we get to introduced into a parallel Chekhov. He's not called Chekhov. They kind of reveal that later, but you could kind of see it in the lead up and, the artwork. He looks strikingly like Chekhov, but different enough that he could have been somebody different, but very bad dude. And ironically, they're also looking for an orb in this one as well, a Bajoran orb. And our, kind of prime characters, Kirk and Crew, don't even know what that means. So that's probably, for me, one of the most interesting pieces of this comic series is seeing these, I don't want to say mirror characters because they're not from the mirror universe, but parallel characters coming in and introducing things to our prime universe that we didn't think were in existence at that time. So, just kind of continuing with the story. It's fun so far. We're only in the second issue, but really looking forward to see where this one goes too.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this one, it's good. It's not great yet, but it's interesting. And, I think it's kind of fun to see Kirk do his thing here, be the Maverick. And that's always an enjoyable part to the story, any Star Trek story. I think it's interesting too because he knows, at least he was told by the Admiral, this is going to be his last hurrah on the Enterprise until he's basically chained back to his desk as an Admiral. And so I think that makes for an interesting story on that side. And then, of course, as always, when you're playing with these parallel universes, it allows our characters to be able to see themselves and experience themselves in a way in which that wouldn't normally be the case, except for when these kind of crazy things happen. So, no, I think this is a good issue. I'm looking forward to reading the next one. It's not as though it's like that other Mirror Universe series that we did read where we were so bored we couldn't even figure out why we were reading it. Like, this one has my interest, right? And so that's a good thing for any comic series. So, no, I mean, comics have been firing on all cylinders, and I can't wait for, we talked about the announcements of the things that are coming out later in the last episode. So we've got so much that's happening now. It's nice to know there are new books on the horizon, great comics. And so I don't know, Casey, maybe we should head to the feature and do a little rebelling.
I rebel.
All right, Casey. So we are wrapping up the Rebels series here, and one of the big things is the natives on this planet. And they're not the Tiffnaki anymore. I'm not even going to try and pronounce what they're called now, because I don't think I would do it justice. And what did you think about the revelation about who these people are and why they're actually on their planet?
I feel like it would have been more interesting if this revelation maybe had been brought about sooner. I mean, we're essentially told that there were, at some point in history, there were 90 million children. And that was kind of the part that got me. These were children that were essentially just dropped off on the planet. It was kind of a survival of the fittest kind of thing. And we eventually dwindled down to the fittest. And with the way that the story's gone, this kind of war that's been brewing this whole time, the Cardassians and the Starfleet team, if they're not careful, could essentially wipe out the rest of this species or this, this population. And, I think dropping the revelation where we got it here in this book, there was really nothing that came of it almost. It almost didn't matter by the end. I mean, it kind of did towards the end. It changed, like once we kind of learned it, some of our characters kind of changed their view of, how this was going to go. But at the end of the day, the natives were strong enough essentially to hold their own against the Cardassians, like between the technology that they invented, but also the training that they got from the Starfleet crew. It was kind of one of those things like, well, did it matter, like, that we knew what the history was? Or, I feel like there could have been more interesting things that we could have come out of this if we'd have been, even in the second book, gotten this revelation and then done something to really build off of that.
Like you said, I think the revelation that this is a social experiment gone completely wrong by apparently an advanced society who is so bored with itself. They want to see, and they are basically asking the question. Dax makes this statement about how they're talking about is technology and culture synonymous with one another, which, I mean, in all honesty, is an incredibly interesting question. And I was thinking about how prescient a question that could be for our time period as of now. Like, when you think about the culture that we have and technology and are they synonymous? Like, that's such a great question to be asking. When you think about the invention of social media and all of these type of things and the way that type of technology has literally altered the course of our society in so many ways. And in some ways, we're still just discovering, right? Such an incredibly interesting question. And yet, like you said, it means nothing here. And it's not that, that's the important thing. Like, Star Trek is always about asking big questions that help us reflect on ourselves and where we are. And that could have been the case here, but it doesn't do that. And I think one of the biggest mistakes is that and the hardest things here is that the natives don't have any trouble at all, because the moment that their magic technology is taken away from them, well, they're all just it's like a planet of Mary Sue's, like they're creating constitutions and they're creating, weapon systems that, we've never even heard of before, but are amazing. And it's just like, it's the most frustrating thing I think about the story is that, our characters here weren't useless, because it did take Sisko turning off their magic technology to allow this metamorphosis to happen. So that, there is a metamorphosis here, but we don't actually use that in any way to, discuss the underlying question at all. And I think, it's one of those things where, as we talked about the Dark Matters series and this one as well, there have been actually some very interesting questions, I think, that have been asked. And yet the books themselves have no desire to dig into the thematic elements that they've brought to light.
Yeah, this was, yeah. If it had been done differently, I feel like this whole storyline and tying it into the Rebels, name that they've used for this trilogy could have been really interesting. And the points that you brought up, it could have been a much more fulfilling story and a much more fulfilling Star Trek story. But ultimately, like, the book spent so much time with the Tiffnaki and, Sisko's storyline, or the Defiant and everybody, that, the resolution of it and the effect on our characters, it was just, by the end of the book, it was just kind of like, okay, we're going home now. Like, they won their battles against the Cardassians, and we're leaving now. It's basically just a huge side quest, supposed to be, storyline B or something like that, and kind of took too much time if there was not really going to be much, meat that came out of it. So, yeah, real shame, kind of a lost opportunity there for what could have been a good storyline, I think.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think the problem, like you even mentioned, like the Defiant part of the storyline and everything, and, that storyline just doesn't go anywhere. I think so many of the storylines kind of end up in a holding pattern until they're just needed, right? And that's not great plotting. You want everything that's happening in the story to feel like it's necessary. And unfortunately, what we get, because of the way that the story has been structured, whole parts of the story just kind of disappear until they're needed to reappear again. And that's not a good way to tell the story. And I think that's really frustrating, especially when, this just doesn't seem to go anywhere. And then can we just talk about the fact that, Starfleet then visits this planet later on and the planet's just gone? Like, it's just such a... Like, they turned their planet into a Death Star so they can just move it? Or just like did they pop into another universe? Like, it's kind of ludicrous.
Yeah. I'd actually forgotten about that part until you just mentioned it. It was
so worth forgetting.
Too. Yeah, it was. And even there, it didn't add anything. I mean, at the very end of the book, they try to ask some like big questions, like, could they have really taken their planet and left? Is that possible? I don't know. And we'll never know. And it doesn't matter. And yeah, it's a shame.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that it is kind of crazy that that's the case. I think that it's also clearly the case with what's happening on the other side of the wormhole on Emissary's Sanctuary or Deep Space Nine or whatever they're calling it, with the Liberated, right? And I mean, what did you think of the revelation that the Liberated were prison guards who used to work for the Dominion, but now they want an orb for some reason, which I don't feel like was ever explained as to why they want an orb, or really how in the world they actually figured out these people were prison guards for the Dominion, other than the world's worst Sherlock Holmes style logic that made no sense. I mean, what in the world was going on with this story, Casey?
I do not know. This is another one that could have been a pretty intriguing story if it was just done any other way than the way it was. They talk about how, we've got, the Jem'Hadar, who are like the muscle of the Dominion. We've got the Vorta, who are kind of the mouthpiece of the Dominion. And so the Liberated are the prison guards of the Dominion. So, and apparently that's all they know how to do, to the point where when they get to Deep Space Nine and people are hiding because the station's getting taken over, these people think that those are prisoners, and they basically try to keep them in prison. And the whole thing with the orb, they didn't really ever talk about what they needed it for. And I mean, Kai Wynn was smart as far as hiding it, basically, and kind of stalling them and, kind of finding a fake orb for them. But, Kira takes quite a beating for that little ruse, and also Wynn plays her cards pretty close to the chest as far as what her plan is here. But, it just the way that we defeat the Liberated and everything, like everything just happens so fast. Like you said, it's just a Sherlock Holmes, mystery where somebody's got all the clues and they've figured everything out. And we're kind of left as the reader going, okay, we'll follow your logic, I guess. And this was, in this particular book, definitely my least favorite part of the story, just because every time we came back to it, I had no idea what was going on.
Right.
Even when we started the book, I was totally lost. I'd forgotten that anybody ever came to the station. It was just, it was all over the place.
Well, and two, I think that the other issue with this storyline and the Liberated especially is the fact that the Wynn character is written in a way that does not make sense with Deep Space Nine. I mean, she just feels like a completely different type of character, except for maybe the fact that at the end, where you kind of can tell that she's been doing this for power reasons. And, so therefore, one of the main reasons, she's going to leave the station and it's going to go back to Starfleet is because of the way in which the government of Bajor is being like, well, if you're there, then we're going to have to set up somebody else's over Bajor instead of the Kai. And so, the whole thing, I think, from, the resolution there that we get with that storyline to what's going on with the Liberated and why they're there at all. I mean, there's no good reason for this story to be happening because, one, none of it makes sense with what we know from Deep Space Nine, so it doesn't actually feel like it fits at all. And two, everything that's happening is just happening because it happens. Again, the Liberated don't feel like they make sense. The storyline with the Kai and everything don't make sense. I think the actual idea of the Bajorans having a test run period is actually a very interesting idea. Again, great thought as a idea of what to do, but it just doesn't work with the story because it's not actually done in a way that makes sense. And then, Casey, can we talk about why in the world are we telling this story about Kai Wynn in the past when it also doesn't seem to make sense with everything? Like, what are we supposed to learn about Kai Wynn? Like, what is going on here?
Yeah, this was from the first book, the story of her past, 30 years ago during the occupation, was kind of my favorite part of the story because I really wanted to know some of her backstory, because she is one of the best villains that we've had in Star Trek. And her and Dukat together, especially, she had such a deep character and such a deep, I don't even want to say evil, but just power hungry nature to her that just didn't come out in this story. And even, like you said, it felt like we had kind of a different Kai Wynn during the Liberated portion of the story. I mean, even Kira reacted to her differently. She almost had a reverence for my Kai, and the way that she talked to her was never how we saw her on the show. And then when we see her in the past, I was really hoping, because I liked the historical stuff of her so much. Well, not so much. Let me not overinflate anything. I liked it a lot more than any of the other parts, but I was really hoping in this story that we would finally get a connection to what was happening on the station, or what was just why she was the way she was. And, she had some trauma just like anybody else did during the occupation, but it wasn't anything that made me feel any sympathy for her. And the only, and the thing that really boggles my mind, the only thing that we really got from her past story to connect it to the now part of the story was Gul, what's his name? Gul Ragat, who shows up on the planet that Cisco's on, and, Dax and Bashir have him held hostage for so long. And even then, like, his part of the story didn't really tie back. Like, it was just so disjointed that you could have put any characters' names on any of these people and it wouldn't have made any difference because it was so disjointed. So, I was really hoping it would stick the landing on this historical piece, or even just to give me something to care about, with Wynn. And it just didn't. And just once again kind of left me disappointed here.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's so well said. And I don't honestly have anything to add to it because I don't know what I could, and this isn't, this has been such a frustrating experience for us. And so I do just have kind of, before we get to our ratings, I do have one question, which was, this trilogy was bad, but how bad was it, Casey?
This, I was doing a little bit of research on this. The publisher didn't even spell the author's name correctly on the covers of the books, which I couldn't find anything about the author's reaction to that or anything. And he's got an interesting, a unique spelling to his name, or at least unique by American standards, I guess. I don't know. But how bad does the publisher have to not care about something to totally misspell a previous Star Trek author's name on their books? All three of them. But then this ended up being the last book that the author published. Again, I don't know why. He had done some tie-ins with Doom, and I feel like there was one other one, but this book that we're talking about today ended up being his last published work that I could find. He was supposed to write 2 books in the A Time to series, A Time to Create and A Time to Destroy, and those would have come out in 2004. So it's 5 years after this one came out, but those ended up getting canceled. So this really was his last Star Trek book and his last book kind of at all. And, I don't remember much. I remember reading his entry in the Invasion books. I don't remember much about it, but it's a shame because, to be a published author and to, he's got multiple works to his credit. It's a shame to kind of end with this, and I don't know if that has any reason behind it or what, but I keep coming back to that word. It's a shame. I feel bad for him if he wanted more, or I don't know, but there it is.
This is one of those things where I feel like it was actually the editor's issue, because the editor should have asked for major rewrites of this story. And I haven't read anything else that they've done in Star Trek or any of their other works. You mentioned like working in other franchises, so I can't judge, but all I can judge is here. And I feel like a lot of this comes down to editorial. But I do think, there's also places where the story and the way it's written, the verbiage used, the way the characters speak, none of it felt right either. So all in all, I just, I think that this just didn't work. And that is unfortunate. Which, I guess, what are you going to rate The Liberated?
Well, once I liberated myself at the end of the book from the book, I gave it a 1 star. This is definitely one of the worst Star Trek books I've read. And I had forgotten what I'd rated the other 2. For some reason, I thought I gave the other 2 kind of the benefit of the doubt and had given them 3 on Goodreads. And I was actually ready to go back and downgrade them to 2s, which when I looked, I had already rated those as a 2. But I mean, this book was a definite 1 star. And as a trilogy, even if I gave those others 2 stars, they were weak 2 stars. And I'd say as a whole, the trilogy for me, it was 1 star, and unless a person's a completionist, I don't think I could really recommend these books, unfortunately.
I mean, I think you said that really well. I do think that this is a frustrating experience in the reading, and it is unfortunate that I do think that this is a 1-star book, and I would heartily agree with you that this is a 1-star trilogy. I would encourage nobody to read these books, unfortunately, and I hate to say that. I also hate to rate books so lowly, but I can't lie to you guys, and I never have, and I never would on this show, and so I did not enjoy it, which is too bad, but maybe we'll have better luck next time.
I guess if Forrest Gump was a host of Literary Treks, he might say that Star Trek books are like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. But, and like we said, we have to be honest in our ratings, and we can't always pick winners, but we've got a lot of good stuff in the future. Like we, talked about in the news segment, we've got some things on the horizon and a lot of things to look forward to. And, we've talked about jumping into the Lost era, and somehow in however many years that Literary Treks has been going, we've never managed to get to those ones. So I'm excited for what's to come.
Yeah, I am too, Casey. We're actually going to be covering one of the Lost Era novels with The Buried Age, which is about Picard's early life. We have covered a couple of the other ones. We covered the one about John Harriman. Both of them, actually. We've covered both of those. But we're going to be covering some of the others. We've also got Cast No Shadow coming up. Of course, we've talked about the fact that we've got the new making of books coming out for Star Trek II, as well as Star Trek Picard. We've got the autobiography of Benjamin Sisko coming out. We've also got the memoir by Patrick Stewart. We're actually going to cover that. We covered Kate Mulgrews, and so that means we're going to be covering Patrick Stewart as well. And so, I think we've got a lot of great stuff coming up. And of course, we mentioned the fact that we've got a new book coming out by David Mack next year, so that'll be awesome. But, Casey, if people want to catch up with you and see what else you have happening these days, where would they find you?
You can find me on Goodreads and Letterboxd at Knitting Trekkie. I've been poking around on Twitter again, so you might be able to find me there at Knitting Trekkie as well. And you can also find me on Facebook in the Babel Conference. It's a good place to catch us and, find announcements about the things that are coming out. And, Matthew's always good about posting on those old podcast episodes about something new that's coming up. So definitely join the Babel Conference.
Absolutely. I love it there. And I love when people want to have conversations about the episodes we're doing. It's always fun. Of course, you can find me all over social media under Matt Rushing02. Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and Vero are the places I'm most active. Of course, outside of Literary Treks, I'm doing the 602 Club. Casey just premiered over on the 602 Club. We talked about The Flash, so everybody should check that out because Casey was great. And then you've also got me doing The Orb, Warp 5, Saddle Up, and The Artificial Tango, all different Star Trek series we're covering on those shows, which is great. And then over on the Nerd Party Network, I've got a completed show called Owl Post about the entire Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time, and Aggressive Negotiations I'm doing with John Mills as we talk about Star Wars each and every week. But thank you so much for joining us, and until next time, live long
and read on.
What do you call that, light reading? To each his own, number one.